Paul, thanks very much for joining us for our interview today. And could you possibly just tell us a little bit about yourself, a bit about where you come from, your faith, and about your career in comedy?
Sure. Yes. When I come from, I come literally from Guildford right now. That's where you find us. Mid lockdown, post lock release. I don't know. Who can say? Yeah, I've lived here for goodness knows how long. I was at school here. Was at drama school here as well. So I sort of I did a theology degree as well at Nottingham University. Before that, I was a Christian as a teenager. Here in Surrey, and so I became a Christian. My parents weren't particularly religious or anything, but they send my brother and I to church as, I think, free childcare, because we were in the Scouts and the choir and the Pathfinders, the Sunday school, the Brownies, anything they could get us into. So I sort of pondered it through my teenage years. Really enjoyed religious studies, really enjoyed my theology degree, but then came out going, well, what do I do now at the end of that 3 years? And I loved theatre, and I loved acting, I loved writing comedy, and I enjoyed watching and listening to comedies. I'd never thought of putting those three things together as stand-up, so to speak. I just enjoyed acting comedy, enjoyed writing comedy, enjoyed watching comedy. So the end of theology degree, drama school, realised I couldn't act at the end of drama school. Thought, what now? Bit of a panic, and then tried stand-up and loved it. And that was about 20 years ago now. So I've been a stand-up for about 20 years. And a good chunk of that time has been the first 10 years or so, probably almost entirely on the sort of mainstream comedy circuit. Maybe the last 10 years or so, about half on that circuit, and then half doing events for churches and around churches. And they're nicer. The heckling is kinder. You can walk in with a cup of tea. And they're just pleasant, nice people. So that's always nice. But of course, in fact, I did an event 5 years ago now, and the Bishop of Oxford was there, and he said, "Oh, you do church events and you do the mainstream comedy thing, don't you?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Yes, you should go back and do mainstream comedy, less church events. Go back out there." And I thought he was going to say the opposite. People sometimes say, "But surely the comedy circuit is a horrible, vile nest of vipers. The church, you can come to the churches." But the Bishop of Oxford said, "No, be gone with you," in a nice way. But he just said, don't forget that to be part of that world, and to be, however you want to interpret it, whether it's sort of bringing mission to the comedy circuit, or just being a Christian person in that world, whatever it might be. And then also the writing side of things. I do comedy writing for TV shows and books, and I've written 9 books now of different things. And again, that's always one foot in churchy side of things and one foot in the mainstream sort of secular media. And that's kind of the way I like it, one foot in each.
So tell us some of the things that you've done in the mainstream media, just to kind of give us because we were talking a few weeks ago with Steve Turner about the need to have more Christians in the mainstream media in particular, and not just doing the Christian thing. So agreeing with the Bishop of Oxford. So what kind of things have you done?
My the potted CV, I suppose, is I started writing jokes for radio shows, Radio 2, BBC Radio have always been really good at having an open door show. So at the minute, it's a show called Newsjack. Any wannabe comedy writers, you can Google Newsjack, write jokes for them. If they like you, they get you in. So I did that, and via various shows got to work with Lee Mack on his Radio 2 sketch show. And sort of jokingly, one day I was at Radio 4, and jokingly the lift doors opened and Lee stepped out, because he's always joking. And he wasn't famous at the time, but I knew of him. I never met him, but I was aware of him on the comedy circuit. So lift doors open, and Lee announced to the open plan office, "I have a sketch show. Where are the writers?" And I just went, "Yeah, I'll do it," And so that's how I got the job on the show. My writing partner at the time was in the toilet, so he didn't get the job, and I did. So the lesson clearly is hold it in. And then, moved to TV with Lee a couple of years after that to do Not Going Out, which we're still doing. In fact, it's the only job I've had really during lockdown, was writing, ironically, a show called Not Going Out while we are not going out. But and then that led to working on Miranda Hart's show, Miranda, largely because I suggested Miranda for the part on Not Going Out and got to know her through that. I didn't know her at all, but I'd seen her on TV, liked her, and said to Lee, you should cast her for
Mm.
the role in Not Going Out. And yeah, that was helpful. I gave her a job, and she's clearly given me a bit as well, writing for her ever since. So those are the two big sitcoms, I suppose. Also Top Gear and TFI Friday. I did both of those by getting to know Chris Evans, doing the Radio 2 Breakfast Show, because I do the Pause for Thought as well.
Yeah.
For the Radio 2 Breakfast Show, which is of course now with Zoe Ball. So in all, I mean, clang, 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 names dropping everywhere here. But the thing is, when you work in an area like that, it's especially if it's entertainment, and it's fairly broad entertainment as well. My taste, of course, is fairly family friendly and pre-Watershed. So I'm never going to be a Frankie Boyle writer, I don't think. But I gravitate towards, I suppose, those shows then. And then therefore you get to work with, I did Michael Bublé a couple of years. Bublé at the BBC, got to actually work with him doing like a hidden camera stunt. And he's there in prosthetics. And I was training him in comedy and how to get the best out of this little sketch that I'd constructed for him. And that's like a pinch yourself sort of, how have we got here kind of moment. But then equally, that then led to the studio part of that show, the Bublé at the BBC show, was Claudia Winkleman interviewing Michael Bublé. And I was, again, my job was writer. So I was on the set for any writing tasks needing doing. Mm-hmm. And the producer would come over to me and say, we need a link for Claudia to introduce Michael's next song. Could you write us a very short link? Really short, though, because we're against the clock. I said, do you want something funny in there? Thinking I'm a comedian. That's my background. That's what I do, comedy. And they said, oh, no, just a really quick one. So I said, well, okay, how about here's Michael Bublé with another song? They were perfect, brilliant. Get that on the auto cue. And you go, how am I? What? I'm meant to be I'm doing this for comedy, and somehow you end up just being the person who just says that because someone has to do it, So they're all in the whole media thing. There are jobs that you don't even think of being as jobs, but someone has to, and it's nice if perhaps there are a few Christians out there doing those jobs, and it's always lovely. I remember working on Miranda a few years ago. I don't go to every episode for the recording, but one episode I was there. Miranda's a Christian as well herself, and so is Sally Phillips, who's on the show, and James Carey was writing for it, Paul Powell, another writer, all Christians, and Miranda on the set introduced me to an actor called Bo, who was playing her beau, ironically, her boyfriend in it. And he was a guest character, and she said, Paul meet Bo, Bo meet Paul, Christian, you can talk now. And that was really nice, just one Christian introducing another Christian and another Christian, just in a workplace. It's a weird workplace, but it's still just a workplace. And, in any workplace, if you think you're the only Christian there, you feel like a dot. If you know another person there, there's like two of you, and then it's a line. And if you know three of you, then you have a triangle, which is, of course, the strongest of all shapes. But the more the merrier, really, isn't it? So it's just nice to know when they're there as well.
And there has been, certainly over the past couple of years, more Christians in the media that are seemingly owning their faith a bit more publicly. And maybe that's because, safety in numbers a little bit and increases a sense of confidence. So that's, and people like Miranda and Sally Phillips actually instill a bit of confidence, I suppose, in the media entertainment industry, doesn't it?
Yeah, maybe so. And I think of instantly people like Dan Walker as well. He's been very public about his faith. And sometimes it's literally when you see a presenter on Songs of Praise, like JB Gill, who was in JLS, or Catherine Jenkins, or Ali Jones, and you go, I didn't know. Sometimes you see it in the listings and go, I didn't know that person was a Christian. And of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that Songs of Praise presenter is a Christian, but generally speaking, it's a bit of a clue, So, I think there maybe are a few more that seem to be more obvious, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's just a sense that people in the past perhaps felt they had to keep it a bit more private, or preferred to keep it more private. I hear, for example, that people like Ian Hislop, someone said that Jack Dee is a churchgoer. I don't know. Obviously, Frank Skinner, of course, has been talking a lot more publicly about his Catholic faith in the last 5 or so years. I think especially as a comedian, someone like Frank Skinner, he's talked quite a lot about this, the fact that it can be tricky to work out how to talk about having a faith as a comedian, because certainly I didn't really talk about it much for about 10 years on stage, simply because all of the autobiographical subject matters that I would talk about, being ginger, being Cornish, being a bit of a nerd, I would sort of self-deprecate. So I would slightly mock being Cornish. And I am proud to be Cornish in reality, but to get a laugh out of it on stage, I'd have a bit of fun with it, you know. So how do you talk about being a Christian and have a bit of fun with it without it being mockery?
Yeah.
And that took me a while, I think, to work out how to do that. And even now to this day, I find it a lot easier in church events because you can refer to the fact you're in a church building and you're a Christian in that environment. At the bawdiest of comedy club gigs, I still haven't quite got an angle on it because it's rather tricky. I saw one Christian comedian a while ago. I didn't even catch his name. He was an open mic act, and he was, again, quite a bawdy, rowdy gig. And he only had 5 minutes to do, so he could sort of get away with it a bit more. But he found a way in by saying, you know, I'm a Christian, and there's a slight woo from the audience. And he said, oh, you know, you can spot us because we're the ones who know the words of all the hymns at weddings, you know. And it was a nice little joke, and it was a little way in, and it was great. And I thought, oh, so that's a nice little angle on it. They just kind of make something relatable to people of all faiths and none in that audience. But then it's like, well, what do you do then? How do you then, you know, build on that and make a 5-minute set out of being a Christian, but deliver that then in a bear pit comedy club? And that's something that I think we're all struggling with. You know, Milton Jones and Tim Vine, probably the two most well-known high-profile Christian comedians, both, of course, well known for not saying anything autobiographical at all in their sets. They just they want to just bring a bit of joy and lift us with just great jokes, you know. So maybe that is the calling of the comedian who is a Christian. Just add a bit of joy to the room.
I suppose seeing our friend Alan on Britain's Got Talent recently, and he was doing the deprecating of his call as a minister, and that engaged the audience a little bit, didn't it? And maybe that's a good place to not take things so seriously, maybe as a way in.
Yeah, maybe so. And I mean, Alan's great, and he's got that. You can see that the act he's giving, you know, I often say, you know, if you're doing a stage act, just kind of be yourself, but be 150% of yourself, you know. So, and Alan's got that sort of sardonic, laid-back weight of the world on his shoulders, kind of bit Tony Hancock about him, but, you know, hangdog thing, which is great for comedy. And it means he can approach anything and just go, yeah, I'm a Baptist minister and I'm a bit fed up. You know, he's got that sort of attitude.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was great. And also, I think if you are a minister, there is also a slight bit of shorthand you've got there. If you're a vicar, you know, there are about 2 or 3 vicars I know who do the comedy circuit, and they could walk out and go, yep, I'm a vicar, or they wear the dog collar, you know, and then go, yep, you know, and then they can have a joke about that.
Yeah.
Whereas I've got to go out there and go, I'm a Christian, I'm a practicing Christian, I'm an Anglican, how would I don't know, what's the best way of a follower of Jesus? What's the way in?
Yeah.
Is honest and genuine, true to yourself, funny. But the thing is, first and foremost, anything you do in a comedy club on a set, it's got to be funny. There's no point, whether you're a Christian or an atheist. You know, I've seen a couple of atheists actually come a cropper at gigs who walk out there and they forget the funny part. They go, I've got an opinion and I'm going to give it. And they walk out there and they just go, hey world, you know, there is no God, blah, 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 blah. And what do you think about that? You know, set the world to rights. And I've seen audiences, you know, secular audiences just walk out, just going, just wanted jokes, just wanted funny, really. Yeah. And it's okay if you can do that stuff and be funny, then fine. But funny's got to come first and foremost, really. I think. So otherwise, people they do smell it if they're being just, dare I say, preached at. You know, it's not the place for a soapbox. You know, it's a place for jokes. That's what people want.
Okay, so going on, we'll probably come back to your own career in a little bit. Just want to think about that sense of an audience wanting jokes. Now, I shared with you a bit before about kind of my picture of Jesus growing up was the Robert Powell in the Jesus of Nazareth, who was inherently grumpy the whole time. And for me, that felt that Jesus, there was a certain unattractiveness about Jesus in that sense. So it made me wonder, was Jesus funny? And how do you think Jesus would have handled humor? And do you see that in any of the gospel stories yourself?
Yeah, I think Jesus was funny. I think, I mean, my opening thought on that really is that humor changes so quickly. And I mean, for example, right now in 2020, we have seen Little Britain, Matt Lucas and David Williams, saying that they regret the sketches and the characters they did, was it 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago? And some of them were 2-3 years ago. And as a nation, some people are still laughing at it, but some people are going, oh, I think that was then. We've moved on since then. That was 10 years ago. You look at stuff from the 1950s or 60s, and we don't laugh in the same way, let alone, you hear old radio shows. Sometimes you've got to tune into your own comedic sense to try and work out why it's funny. Then you go Oscar Wilde, you go back to a Shakespeare comedy. We look at it and go, is this funny? And sometimes it's the way you tell them, isn't it? It takes quite a skilled comic actor to get the laughs out of a Shakespeare comedy. 500 years ago, that is. Then you go out to the Bible 2,000 years ago, 4 times as far back as Shakespeare. And yeah, we're not going to get the jokes. We're in a very different culture, in a very different time. But I'm sure there's humour there. The fact that you've got, Sermon on the Mount, he talks about, get rid of the plank in your own eye before the speck of dust in someone else's. It's a use of comic exaggeration. And building on rock and on sound. These are metaphors, these are stories, he's a storyteller. Not only that, I find it interesting that that speck and the sawdust thing and the plank in the eye, he's a carpenter. He's from a carpenter background. His dad's a carpenter. It's the family business, and he's using a wood-based metaphor to get the point across. Fishers of men, he says, to the disciples, these are people who are fishermen, and he's using fishing metaphors and allegories and these sorts of things. And scattering seed and all of the parable of the sower and that sort of thing. He's speaking to farmers, fishers, carpenters, people who work with their hands. I've got this theory. This is only my theory, right? It may not hold water, but I just wonder if the Bible spoke to people a little more clearly sometimes, up to about 150, 200 years ago, when our jobs were more like the biblical jobs, where people still work the land and, with their hands and carpentry and fishing and that sort of stuff. Yeah. And then about 100 years ago, whatever, Industrial Revolution, and the jobs changed. We started working in factories, and now we're, IT managers and things like that. And you open the Bible and you look at it and go, well, this is all about fishing and carpentry and farming. Where's the bit about, logging on to Google Drives? I don't know anything about computers. I'm making up words now to do.
Switching off, switch it back on again. That one.
Exactly. And maybe there's a translation of the Bible to be done that changes the jobs. I don't know. But my point is that, I think Jesus, he knows his audience. He's seeing their lives, their work lives, their existences. You cannot give a Sermon on the Mount, as far as I'm concerned, without great crowd control and storytelling gifts and humor. And we may not laugh out loud when we read the Sermon on the Mount nowadays. Partly, I'm sure, I honestly as well reckon that when he's saying all that stuff, they've kept the good stuff. Yeah. They've not included the warm-up material. They've not included the bit that actually, come on, everyone, gather in. Come on. Oh, yeah, I want to tell you a story. Yeah, even you. Come on, all that sort of thing. Yeah. And, this is, whatever you believe about Jesus, Son of God, or, as I believe, people who just believe Jesus was a great teacher, it's in there, in the Bible. You can see this is a skilled, brilliant orator, storyteller, conveyor of wisdom. Yeah. And I think the humor has to be woven through that. And you can actually see it there in some of those parables. Like I say, they're all stories to be told.
Yeah, especially when there's incongruity, when things, the plank and the speck and a camel and an eye of a needle, we can still see that we just don't roll on the floor with laughter, I suppose. And certainly where I came to it is that for a person to be able to command an audience of 5,000 plus, and for these people to follow him, I just thought of our comedians today, is that they're the ones that engage people. And in an age when people say the sermon is over, it's too boring, you have people listening to yourself and to others for 2 hours, just a person standing speaking. Yeah. So, that's certainly challenged my view. And I think, you're right about the context. We just don't get the same context. So if you think that Jesus did use humor and was engaging, why do you think that we often see him, and maybe the world sees him, as so serious and dour?
Well, with because he is this brilliant teacher, this human brilliant teacher, but also this divine Son of God. That's very that's confusing for the fragile human mind, but also, and we have 2,000 years of things that humanity has put in the way, and layers that we've added to it. And of course, the organised. I mean, arguably one of the best things that has happened for Christianity, I think, has been the church. But one of the worst things that's happened has been organised religion as well, because as soon as you are on a pedestal, you look at the Monty Python, going back to humour again, and the Pythons, and they would knock the church off its pedestal. They would be throwing rocks at it. When it's literally Life of Brian, they're doing the rock throwing, aren't they? But and the way that they would kind of skewer those things. And I've heard interviews with various of the Pythons in the last 5-10 years where they say actually they wouldn't do that now with the church, because the church back then felt more powerful and felt more part of the institution than it does now, which on the one hand, you can look at it and go, that's a real shame for the church that we maybe don't hold that position of authority, or at least that people would refer to it as a position of authority that they're used to. But on the other hand, if it is something that is on a pedestal and people are seeing a need to rebel against it in that sense, then maybe they're kind of seeing it wrong anyway. We have, of course, had hundreds of years, thousands of years in that sense of the church, trying to, hundreds of years ago, just govern people in whole different ways. And there is an argument as to how helpful that has or hasn't been, really. And one of the responses from that is that it can be seen very serious and dour and telling you what you should and shouldn't do and things like that. But it misses out on the human level. It misses out on the real ground level. And one thing, of course, you see out of this whole lockdown process is people going, well, the church is out there doing like it's never been before. It's going door to door. It's our church locally does, we're delivering things all over the shop and connecting with people. And I found it fascinating to see that, the government are now saying, churches can open to this degree and that degree. And then you're starting to see some churches going, well, actually, okay, well, A, we're not ready to open for various reasons or whatever. B, do we really want to? We're kind of busy out there at the community right now. We've got more stuff to do. We could open, for private prayer and for this and that. And some are. And others are going, actually, look, you can pray where you want to be, and we'll open again there as soon as we possibly can. But our manpower at the minute is going out there being the church to other people. And I'm seeing locals where I am, to a degree, just not everywhere, but realizing the church has an existence in a very different way than I think they thought it did. And it's much more personal. And hopefully, therefore, it means you can have a laugh and a joke together, hopefully, rather than feel like you're having a finger wagged at you the whole time.
Okay, so on the theme of jokes, which is kind of your stock in trade, what about the fine line about offensive comedy? How, there's so many times you would tell a joke and the picture is a Christian would go, well, that's offensive. And they have the biblical backing about foolish talk and coarse language. So how can we deal with offensive comedy, or and how can we? Are we allowed to go to comedy clubs that use swear words and inappropriate material? Are we allowed to laugh at them?
Well, there's a question and a half, isn't it? Offence is in the eye of the beholder, the ear of the beholders. I don't know, whatever the word is. I can't guarantee what will or won't offend people. There are some jokes, of course, you'd hear and go, well, that is surely, totally identifiable as offensive, depending on the joke. But there is a whole grey area, I think. I could say, why did the chicken cross the road? And it turns out in the front row of the audience, there's a farmer whose chicken has just been run over. That's going to hurt that guy. And I can't read the room on that one. I've got it wrong in the past many a time. That I've got on stage, done what I thought was a perfectly innocent joke, and it turns out that there's someone in who has been affected by I've unfortunately landed on something by accident. All I can do is do my best to try and make it as warm and as accessible for as many people as possible. I still sometimes get it wrong. I can just keep on trying. But in terms of, can we laugh at offensive things? First, I think that, there are different senses of what offence really means. You can choose to be offended. You can choose not to be offended. But also you have your own lines, I think. You can be accountable to yourself as to what you think is too far. And it's okay if you get that wrong. Sometimes you might go to a comedy club and stick around for a bit longer than you're comfortable with. And you don't need to beat yourself up on the way home about you know, you've done nothing wrong. You've just been there and you've heard a joke, and it's okay. Sometimes we hear a thing, you can't unhear it, so be it. But yeah, I just think that personally, I'd rather be part of the culture and part of the conversation than not. I've been to some comedy. I don't recall ever walking out of a comedy club for an offensive joke. I've heard many jokes that I don't like, but I don't think that means I have to walk out.
Yeah.
But I did one comedy club gig, I don't know, 8 years ago now, where the act on before me was doing a sort of anti-Christian routine. And if I'm honest, it felt a bit one note. It felt like they were jumping on a bit of a bandwagon, because I've heard equally anti-Christian routines which have a little bit of either intelligence or humor or something behind it, whereas this seemed a little bit like, okay, we just want to just bash this religion thing without much, you know, it was just referring to the Bible as a fictitious work and but as a book of fiction, you know, and kind of a cheap laugh. Didn't really get that cheap laugh, you know. The audience saw through it, and I could have walked out, but I was on in a minute for a start. I was the next act on, so it just meant I then had an opportunity to go on and give my side of things and do some jokes about being a Christian and talk about, and the audience go, okay, this is feels like a balanced, felt like a BBC interview. They've got one from each side of there. Quite nice. So yeah, so in that sense, I'd rather be part of the conversation than not. I mean, one other quick example, when I do the writing side of things as well, is a few years ago, I remember I had a script land on my desk, which was an 8:30 at night sort of pre-Watershed sitcom. It was a pilot script by a fairly young writer. They needed more jokes in it. And what this writer had done is he'd ended various scenes of the sitcom with your main character sort of exasperated, like, oh no, as you know, as you get in sitcoms, my world is crumbling around me. And this person, because he couldn't use any swear words at 8:30 at night, he'd used the name Jesus and God as an expletive, which I hate to tell you, people do out there. I don't like it. It wounds me. I hear it. I cringe. I don't like it. I wish it would happen less on the TV and out there. I've got a couple of friends who do it quite regularly, and I've said to them, you know, you've got to feel free to do what you want to do. Just know that I don't like it, and if you want to do it, it's up to you. But every time you do it, I kind of shudder. I shiver, it kind of hurts me. And one of them stopped and one of them keeps on going. That's their point. But this writer, he put that in the script. And I thought, well, this is going to go out to potentially several million people. What do I do as a Christian? Do I go, I'm offended by this. I can't have my Saviour's name being used in this context. But then I thought, you know, even if I get past it on this occasion, they'll find a way to exclude me from the process. I don't want to be the guy who puts up hurdles and bridges and barriers. I'd rather be the guy who does better than this. So what I did, I zoomed in on each of those lines. My job was to gag up his script and script edit it and make it funnier and better for the TV, more chance of getting out there, really. So I just zoomed in on those lines, and I just thought they're cheap humor. You know, you look at Blackadder, Fawlty Towers, they had exasperated characters. They had the angriest characters in sitcom. And yet I don't recall Blackadder or Basil Fawlty ever saying Jesus or God in any expletive manner.
Yeah.
So you don't need it, you know, and TV shows often do they just take the easy option of doing it nowadays. So I would zoom in on those lines and just try and think of a funnier, better, more creative, constructive, humorous way out of that scene with the character saying something just better and funny. So I just kind of feel there is a time, certainly I'm sure, for putting your hand up and saying no thank you to this. But often I think just being better than it and more creative can actually be a better way out for me, certainly.
Well, that kind of goes into the next question a little bit, which is, what have been for you the challenges of being a Christian in the media, in the entertainment business, and particularly in the area of comedy?
I think the twin challenges is there's the stand-up side and there's the writing side, which are both slightly different. So yeah, with the stand-up side, like I say, it's really the worst you get is when you are on a bill with other comedians who might be, you know, the sort of, I had one comedian who not recently, 3 or 4 years ago now, sort of claimed that I should be off the artistic roll call, you know, because comedians can be rather free with their thoughts, let's put it that way, rather obstinate, you know, and he was very much stubbornly saying, yeah, you should be off the artistic roll call. You're a Christian, therefore there are places that your comedy will never go to. There are certain jokes you will never do. And therefore, how can you be a proper comedian if you do that stuff, but you won't do that stuff over there? And I sort of had to point out to him that there are places that he wouldn't go to either. And he said, no, I'll do jokes about anything. And I said, if you will do jokes about anything, how is it that every single set I've ever seen you do only does jokes about sex and drugs and not even rock and roll? You know, it's just sex and drugs. If you are prepared to do jokes about anything, why do I not hear you do jokes about anything? Shopping trolleys, you know, kids having half-term holidays, beaches, picnics, you know, something, you know, wholesome, we might want to say, but just something other. You don't just because you want, you can be edgy the whole time. You don't need to spend your entire time at the edge. You know, surely sometimes come back in again into the mainstream. So in that sense, I think we've all got places we will go to for our comedy, and all places that we won't go to. And I don't just mean as comedians, I mean as everyday people, you know, telling a joke down the pub back when we could go into pubs, or at home or wherever, or online. We will have different lines. You know, I know Christians who send me jokes that I certainly go, I wouldn't do that joke, you know, but we all have our own consciences, our own relationships with God, and we pray about it and we work on what we should or shouldn't do perhaps. So I think that's one challenge is I found certainly dealing with rather pig-headed comedians who have very big opinions about what should or shouldn't be said. But most of them I find are very tolerant people, and they want to say their thing. I want to say my thing, but we all just want to get a good laugh out of people, and that's what unites us. That's great. In the writing side of things, it's more, the challenge I suppose is more about what should or shouldn't be on the screen. And sometimes that's about language. Sometimes it's about what you're portraying. And if I'm honest, I've had one or two people say to me, "Oh, you're right for not going out." Yeah, and most people say that's great and they enjoy it. But I've had one or two people say, "Oh, yeah, it can be quite edgy and late night, can't it?" Which it can be. You know, Lee has some big ideas of where he wants to go. They've had episodes set making adult movies, and you know, it's in a sort of sitcom version of that, so there's no nudity or anything like that. But tonally, sometimes there can be scenes that I wouldn't come up with myself, and then I have a decision: do I want to be part of this or not? And I think I'd rather be part of the conversation. I'd rather there's a Christian in the room, because basically, if I weren't there to sort of rein in where the jokes were going, sometimes just imagine where they go then. You know, if that's the version you see on the screen, which sometimes goes to those places and then some. I think sometimes it could. Yeah, I think Christians in all realms would be great. You know, I mean, I'm speaking out loud in there, but which is how speaking works. But I don't know if there must be Christians in, I don't know, the adult film industry, in the drug trade, in whatever, I don't know. And you could look at that and go, how can Christians operate in those places? And then I think, well, actually, I think I'd rather there are Christians in those places. Those places, I'm sure, will be there because we're in a broken world, and that's where we are. Humanity is broken. It's probably best if we've got some Christians in all places of society to do good things in the places they're doing those good things. So I think let's get out there and be in different places by all means. Okay.
And so how has your faith in Jesus helped or hindered your work and career?
I have no idea, I suppose, because I don't know the alternative. I don't know where I would be without that. How is it? I'm sure it must have hindered to a degree. I'm sure there are comedians and writers or producers who, and I know actually there are one or two producers who haven't worked with me because I'm a Christian, and they feel like I'd be, using sitcom or comedy writing to proselytize a message. I don't know what they think, but then equally, I've some of the areas I've worked in. I wrote a book a few years ago on the history of Christmas, and we did that then as a podcast for Audible. I've pitched it around as a TV idea. I've done a couple of guest slots on things like Songs of Praise and stuff, talking about where different Christmas customs come from. And I know that one or two places I've pitched the ideas to, I think have sensed like, oh no, we don't want to, we're not preachy here, so therefore we don't want to do this thing. And I have to explain to them, I'm not trying to preach with this message only in the way that as a Christian I'm trying to preach all the time. Don't tell anybody. But no, this is just an idea. I wanted to get out there some of these great things of why we have Christmas crackers and turkeys and sing Christmas carols and all these different things. You know, the Christingle. You know, the fact that you've got the orange with the candle and the light of the world, and it's the orange is the world, and the ribbon is Christ's blood. You know, yes, there's a Christian message in that, but there's also a cultural, interesting explanation as to, oh, that's why we do that thing. You know, and yeah, there's no reason that shouldn't be out there, I think, in the mainstream. So again, it's an ongoing and I'm finding at the minute, I'm doing my big focus at the minute is the history of broadcasting. And part of that is about how some of those very first radio messages were from vicars. The Reverend John Mayo was the first BBC vicar back in 1922, and there's a great sermon, you can still hear it online, that he gave and saying, I've never spoken from as esteemed a pulpit as this, I hear tens of thousands of people can hear this message. And you think, actually, yeah, that's quite a big moment. Before that, any sermon was only as far as the human voice could really be amplified, So, but trying to pitch that around as an idea that, we could do a show about this. And people go, but is this just a Christian thing? You go, it's a cultural thing. We're talking about this wider issue. So there's a challenge, I suppose, in that. But in terms of the help of being a Christian, I mean, also it's quite a lonely job, this, driving up and down the country, although I've been doing a bit less of that lately, if I'm honest. But sometimes you're driving back at 3:00 in the morning, it's a 4-hour drive home. And also when you have a good gig, it can feel brilliant. When you have a bad gig, it can feel awful. And you can feel like they hate you. That audience hated me that night. Not the jokes, but it's very personal. But knowing that you have that co-passenger in the car with you, knowing that Jesus is with us on these steps of our journey. And sometimes it means apologizing. Sometimes it means that I have to say, I'm sorry. I don't think, God, I did the best, for you tonight. I don't think I was reflective in the right way of what's best for you. And, one example, I did a gig a couple of years back, and it was a village hall gig. I've been doubling up, which means I've been opening at one gig and then racing down the road and closing at the other. So I didn't see the first half of this second gig. And the compere said to me, they're really rowdy audience. Go on and give it all your best sort of raciest, roughest material. I thought, I don't really do racy and rough material. And I should have just done what I do. But I fell for it. I fell for the vision painted of this room, and I looked at the room and they were a bit boisterous. And I just bored. I was never that outrageous. I wasn't Frankie Boyle, but I boarded it up a little bit. And I walked off and I just sort of thought, that's not me. I did wrong tonight. That wasn't me. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, a man came up to me at the bar afterwards, and he said, oh, hello. I'm a vicar from the church down the road. I thought, oh no, here we go. And he said, we've booked you for a comedy show in a couple of months' time. We've come just to sort of get a sense of what you like. Do you have another set that you might be able to give us when you come and see us? And yes, I have. That wasn't me. Just ignore that. That was the idiot me that launched into that because the compere said otherwise. So yeah, there's the thing with the stand-up circuit. It's a constant. There's not a finished product. You're always trying to improve. Just like in life, we're always trying to look back at what we did yesterday and improve as we go forward today and tomorrow and so on. Yeah. And having Christ at our side and trying to work as to what's best for him, I think is a constant help in that improvement.
Okay. So just to kind of wrap it up, if that's okay, our series is about life with Jesus. We looked at weeping with Jesus last week, and because we have that famous phrase, Jesus wept, it makes it a lot easier. And to know that if there was one that said Jesus laughed, that would be great. So just this phrase, laughing with Jesus, what does that conjure up for you? What does that mean for you?
I mean, yeah, it's joy, isn't it, really? Yeah, laughing. When we laugh, we often laugh with other people. We don't often laugh on our own as much. And if we do, we get looks. I think it's fair to say. But if you're watching live at the Apollo on TV at home, you may not laugh out loud as much. But if you go out to a comedy club with other people, then it's great. And that's why I'm doing online comedy shows throughout lockdown. Every Tuesday, you're welcome to have a Google. You can find me on Facebook Live, and they're great. And it's the best we've got for now. And I get a real sense that when people join in on the chat, many of those people are at home alone, and it's a real connection, and it's a community, and it's an outlet, and all that sort of thing. And that's great. It's an imitation of when we are together in person in a room, and that can be in a comedy club, it can be in a church, it can be in a theatre, but that sense of coming together, or even a pub, when you've got, as Jesus said, whenever 2 or 3 people are gathered together in my name, there I am. And similarly, that sense of community, when you have 3 mates together in a pub, Christian or not, there's that sense of, oh yeah, we needed this sense of community to have a laugh together. So laughing with Jesus it's that sense of community and joy that you have when you are with other people And even when we feel alone in our own lives, I think there's that sense that we're never quite alone. We've always got someone else there with us, and he can laugh with us, and he can weep with us, and he can rejoice with us. And when we have that sense of joy, he can share with that. And I think that's a marvelous thing. And obviously, in these rather troublesome days, we can't wait to be celebrate joy again, wherever that may be. Comedy clubs, churches, theatres, just ideally outside of our own homes one day.
Okay. Paul, thank you so much for everything that you've shared, and look forward to seeing more of what you produce online and also hopefully on TV again. And we have said before that we'd be great to have you up in Skipton to do a gig, if you'd be up for that sometime.
Can't wait. As soon as they let us, I shall be.
That's superb. So thank you so much again for the interview, and yeah, take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Cheers, mate.